So I've never done this. I don't go on YouTube. I don't create videos. I don't create content. I don't do any of this crap. I decided at this moment to do this because I just kind of think things are just overly stupid, and people are just overly dumb at the moment. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking and I'm talking to people and they're talking about how bankruptcy happens, and here's the definition. Here's the Google AI version of what the answer is. So several factors can lead to bank failures in the US, including poor risk management, economic downturns, and bank runs. Specifically, recent failures of banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank were triggered by a combination of interest rate risks and concern of depository base, and then the potential of rapid deposit withdrawals. So in reality, they're trying to say that people were just withdrawing too quickly, and they were taking an interest rate problem. So, and that's probably more or less their interest rate to the customer. So now, if you think about it, and like I said, excuse the mess in the background, I'm actually going to be moving, so all my stuff's piled up. But the reality is that you have a bank like Chase that's worth about $3 trillion. It's, if I remember correctly, in using it, it only has a 0.01% interest yield, which means that you are actually yielding. You, per every $1,000, are making like a penny, versus somebody like the U.S. bank, who has for every $100,000 like a 3 point something percent interest. So if you think about it in the terms of, say, freaking Elon Musk. Elon Musk has $900 billion. So $900 billion, 100 with 1% of 100 is one. So if you sit there and you take the 3%, then that's three. So if you take 9 billion or 900 billion, that's what, 9, 18, 27, 27. So $27 billion, something to that effect. It's a super high interest yield. So if they're talking about how there's this need for the Fed, which uses and utilizes mine, yours, and everybody else's money in order to keep these banks afloat and to keep these businesses afloat and to make sure that they operate basically, and let's just make sure that I'm not on some stupid rant and sounding like a freaking idiot. But what does the Fed do, and or how is it used? Let's see if it doesn't give me a different definition than the other one. Okay, the Federal Reserve, the Fed, is the central bank of the United States, and its primary function is to promote a strong U.S. economy. This involves maintaining maximum employment and stable prices, often referred to as the Fed's dual mandate. The Fed achieves these goals through monetary policy, which influences the availability of money and credit in the economy, which is kind of ridiculous in itself, because then the people who supply the Fed are creating the credit line. But by adjusting interest rates, the Fed can encourage or discourage borrowing and spending. So then the bank is dictating that, being the federal bank, is dictating that of the spending and the lack of spending for the American people by that of which we're taxed, correct? Lower interest rates make it cheaper for individuals and businesses to borrow, or for the borrow potential, stimulating economic activity. Higher interest rates can curb inflation by making borrowing more expensive. So basically, the more that these people buy, the higher the interest rates are, the more money that they're going to owe in the end, and the more money we have to put out. So the dual mandate, the Fed's actions are guided by its dual mandate to promote maximum employment, stable prices, low and stable inflation. The Fed aims for the average inflation rate of 2% over time. 2%. So 2% to what? It does not say. But definitely, we're getting taxed more than 2%. We're getting taxed anywhere from 35% to 50% on our income. We're getting 10% tax on our spending for anything that we buy. We're getting housing taxes, luxury taxes, tax. So are they talking about 2% of the entire world's economic situation? Are they talking about 2% of the U.S.'s entire economic situation? Basically, finances. Like this, this is all just, in my eyes, utter bullshit. So what you have really, and what you have going on, is the Fed has been left institutionalizing and mandating a tax on everybody in any form they could completely think of. So they're sitting there telling us that we're getting taxed and we're getting taxed again, and we're getting taxed again, and we're getting taxed again. And according to different definitions of the Fed, because that one's been changed since I looked it up 2 days ago, it's helping banks and it's helping businesses. So we're getting taxed in order for these banks and these businesses not to fail. So how would a bank fail? One, you're going to loan way more money than you could ever repay. Or two, you're going to take somebody like Elon Musk and you're going to create an interest yield for him that's way beyond its own expenditure. And then you have a bunch of other millionaires and billionaires which are over here with the same interest yield, and they can never spend it back. So what are they doing? They're taxing you, me, and the other individuals in order to make that money back. So is this big, beautiful bill that they're talking about actually going to stop that from happening? Probably not. But another thing, if you're sitting there and you're lending out money, you're giving loans that people can't pay back, you have some 20% interest rate, you give somebody $100,000 loan, and then all of a sudden they own 100,000, 20,000, another 2,000, and it just keeps compiling. You're just putting yourself more and more in debt, which these people can't pay, but they're also being taxed in order to recover from. So if you can't call BS on that, then why the businesses? Why are we still supporting businesses? Why is it that the Fed has now become basically its own like personal freaking stock in order to keep these businesses afloat? Could it be the people that own them? I don't know. I really don't get into this stuff, like I said. But the reality is the fact that we're bailing out these businesses is that us as taxpayers who are already funding these businesses and basically are already purchasing things and having a 10% tax rate to purchase these things are paying everything and then some again in taxes in order to keep them afloat. And they wonder why we don't think it's fair. And then they're the ones that are making billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars, getting taxed 50% off the top through their businesses, then getting taxed another 30 to 40, almost 50% on what their actual personal income is, or at least what they're claiming. And then they're setting up these trusts and these things that are yielding an interest, of which are bringing in 3% interest yields on billions of dollars, and they're wondering why that they're going under. They're wondering why the banks are unstable. They're wondering why all these things do not actually converge to meet unless they take from all of us who are super poor, working for Uber, making $700 a week driving for Uber, then paying $250 or more in gas just to drive for Uber, which means that entire week they only made 300 and something dollars from Uber, because Uber only allows you to be paid out the time that you were actually driving people rather than the time that you were on the app. And when they decide to make this slight increase into what you're getting paid, it's like 20, 30, 40 bucks. So they paid for one gas tank. So the reality is this: you, I, the other people in the world, 70% of the population, if not more, are working for Best Buy, this place, the other place, and at the end of the month, we're making $2,000 a month. If you divide that by the 160 hours, of which we worked 40 hours a week, that's $12.50. And that's in places that are paying top dollar. So on average, even if you're getting paid $19.50, $20, even as high as $25, what they're taking out and what you ask them to take out for 401k, for life insurance, for health insurance, for all these different things ends up becoming $6, $8, $10, however many dollars for whatever it is that you're asking for, medical, whatever. So at the end of the day, you're still only making anywhere between $2,000 if you get that 40 hours in, and or you're making maybe 2,400, 2,000 this, 2,000 that. So you're basically paying a $1,700 rent split between two people. You're paying another $40, $50 a week in gas. You're paying $300, $400, $500 every 6 months, give or take, for depending on how much you eat. You're paying $100 and something phone bill. You're paying the residual of doctor bills. Whatever it is you're paying, and they tell us that this is economically sound. And then they're going to pass this big, beautiful bill which alters taxation, using taxation, and still telling us it's economically sound. It's not. None of it. It's never been economically sound. It's never going to be economically sound. And it's never going to help any of us. So just get that through your heads. You have people who have specialized in one category of education their whole lives and make up less than 1/1 millionth of a percentage. And they're trying to tell you in the teaching that they were given that this is going to still work. And it creates a populace that's poor. They originally started off using a gold reserve and using that gold reserve to create an amount of money that recreates and refundamentally gives a bill percentage to which they can have 150 million or whatever it is in bills. And then with the trade and the growth and everything else, they're using that money and they're putting it into a banking system, which creates ones and zeros electronically now, but they still never have that money. They couldn't cover us if we decided to take all of our money out of the bank. In fact, it not only would drive our economy to poverty, it would take Israel, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, the UK, everybody. It would drive them all into poverty. And we would find out that there's no money, basically, except the $150 billion of cash. So why in the world are we not using, if we chose to, in that instance, use gold as a reserve? Why aren't we using untapped everything as the potential to create a real fantastic economy? I mean, if we had trillions and billions and quadrillions and zillions of dollars in untapped reserves, we could eliminate poverty tomorrow. We could give everybody that's in this country, which is the U.S., not all of America, the U.S., $250,000 a year, which is $20 million over 80 years. So if you think that's like way too much, it's way too much. It's going to have $50 quadrillion worth of debt, and we're going to have to pay it back in taxes. Like, no, you're just levying against what's already untapped. But here's the greater reality. With $250,000, which is about 20K a month, you could pay off your $3,000 debt in your home, your $1,000 debt for your car. If you're actually purchasing a home, that $1,000 debt. You could pay your own doctor bills. You could buy your own life insurance. You could do all these other things, which would come out to somewhere around like $17,000, give or take a month, depending on what you buy and what you're not buying. So it really would make it so you still had to work no matter what. But in reality, if you retro dated it to someone like me who's in my 40s, I would get $10 million up front, and then the 250,000 a year. Now, if you take a dual income of 125,000, there's a 250,000 income, which covers one person. But if you overlap it over time and you create a greater reality, it will eventually end up with today's taxation as it is. Like if you didn't tax that portion, but you kept taxing everything else, their earnings, you're still making what, $31 trillion, actually $61 trillion, because that's only half. Um, Eventually you'll get this continuous rollover of which builds and builds and builds. Now, it may take thousands and thousands of days, years, weeks, months, whatever. It might take, 10 generations, whatever. But if you take someone like Elon Musk is what, $900 billion. He's supposed to have like 14 kids, this, that, and the other. If you take it and just round it up to 1 trillion, that's $500 billion. So how many 20 millions fit in that 900 billion? It's enough for multiple generations. And those multiple billionaires within the United States, as well as millionaires. So if you really think it and think about it, had and if I went to college, that $10 million would pay off my college, that debt would be gone. If I had credit cards and had debt there, that debt would be gone. I wouldn't have to sit there and have a job, even though it'd be great if they still did give me all these incentives to work for them. I'd be able to pay for them myself. I'd be paying my car insurance. I'd probably buy my own home. I would have whatever car I wanted to use. And if I still drove for Uber, I wouldn't be going $1,000 in debt. I'd be able to continue to do Uber and just help out these elderly people get from A to B. But like I said, I'm moving, so I'm only doing Uber for whatever purposes it serves for now. I'd rather go and finish these certificates, become an IT tech or whatever else it is, and actually have a job that pays me somewhere between 60 to 120K. But the potential and the reality is if you have an accumulating amount of growth that just continues to grow, continues to grow, continues to grow. It can only be put towards social programming, but you're eliminating the need for social programming. The only thing that it could be done for is whatever would be actually left in a presidential debate, which in reality is if you got rid of the whole problem with the economic system and scenarios and all these debts, you would basically rid yourself of any of them. And I know right now on this slight rant, it doesn't make the greatest amount of sense. But if you actually were to do the math, like I'll just throw some math at you for right now. $3 trillion on this whole virus bill. Okay. $3 trillion put into a $50,000 home. It's $560 million. 560 million homes. You charge $500 in rent. $500 of rent times 12 months ends up being $6,000. So you just paid for over 10 years that $50,000 home with the $10,000 extra. And then on top of that, over that 10-year period, that $3 trillion turns into $3,600 billion. So if that $3,600 billion every 10 years went directly into just that housing structure, everybody in this country with 560 million homes that are $500 rents would not only be able to start purchasing homes and boost the economic scenario without causing any real debt that didn't pay itself back. So if you take that reality and you turn it into the reality against all these untapped resources, it would do the same thing. But instead, we have these people who think their economic scenario and economic reality is to pay back the debts that they're causing by their interest yields. I don't understand how it works. I probably won't understand this big, beautiful bill. I'll probably get a bunch of you that probably have this sense that you have a greater understanding of reality than I do. But the reality is that we are taking companies who are failing, and instead of letting them fail, we continue to support them. We are taking banks, and instead of making sure that bank doesn't lend, doesn't give away money, and isn't giving away an interest yield, we continue to create debts that never get paid back, and then we bail them out using our tax money. So, greater perspective of reality. $250,000 into $20 million over an 80-year span of lifetime. No matter what you're earning, no matter how much you earn in a dual family income, any of that helps out substantially, creates an equality across all genders, colors, creeds within the U.S., for the U.S., by the people of the U.S. And they still get to keep this fucking taxation bullshit that they're doing to us. So, I don't know, maybe I'm just stupid. But the reality is, we're getting fucked.